Behind the glitz and charm of Nashville's biggest stars lies a darker truth. Not every country legend was a joy to work with. Some demanded perfection, others ruled their crews with fear, and a few turned every session into chaos. In this video, we'll uncover 11 country legends who were toxic to work with, the ones whose tempers, egos, and backstage behavior made them unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. 1. Toby Keith, the patriot with a temper. At the height of his fame, Toby Keith was more than just a country star. He was a cultural force. Songs like Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue and Should Have Been a Cowboy turned him into the face of post-9/11 America, blending patriotism with outlaw bravado. He sold millions of albums, filled arenas across the U.S., and became the very definition of mainstream country dominance. But behind the booming voice and flag-waving persona was a man whose fiery temper and stubborn pride made working with him a storm few could weather. Those who toured with Toby often described an environment ruled by intensity and control. He demanded absolute professionalism, but rarely returned the same grace under pressure. Studio engineers recalled sessions where he'd suddenly stop mid-take, toss his headphones aside, and bark orders at the soundboard. One producer once said, Toby didn't want collaboration. He wanted submission. His bandmates, though loyal, admitted that his moods could flip in an instant, especially when alcohol or politics entered the conversation. Many remember him as fiercely opinionated and utterly unwilling to compromise. The same attitude carried into his media relationships. Keith's feud with the Dixie Chicks is now part of country music legend, a clash of egos and political beliefs that spilled far beyond Nashville. He was known for publicly mocking journalists he didn't like, walking off interviews, and even confronting photographers backstage. While fans admired his no-nonsense, no-apology image, many insiders quietly dreaded having to work under him. For tour managers, his insistence on last-minute changes, strict security, and emotional volatility turned every show into a balancing act. Yet, even his harshest critics admit Toby Keith's toughness came from an authentic place. He fought his way up from honky-tonks in Oklahoma, built his career without Nashville's help, and carried the scars of rejection that made him fiercely protective of his brand. Some believe his toxic behavior wasn't cruelty, it was survival instinct, sharpened by years of fighting for control in an industry that rarely gives it. When news broke of his cancer diagnosis in later years, many former collaborators softened their tone, remembering not the tyrant, but the tireless worker who demanded the best because he gave his all. Toby Keith's legacy remains complicated: a patriot, a powerhouse, and a perfectionist whose fire burned bright enough to light up arenas and sometimes to scorch those standing too close. 2. Miranda Lambert, the diva with a broken heart. Miranda Lambert rose to fame as the fiery Texas girl who brought attitude back to country music. From Kerosene to The House That Built Me, she earned a reputation as a fearless storyteller, raw, emotional, and unapologetically honest. Fans loved her grit and independence, but behind the stage lights, many in the Nashville circuit described a woman who was as intense off stage as she was on the mic. Working with Miranda, they said, could be a test of patience, pride, and emotional endurance. In her early career, Lambert was known for her perfectionism. Bandmates recalled endless rehearsals and tense recording sessions where she would redo vocals for hours, chasing the emotion she felt wasn't honest enough. A former sound engineer once admitted, when Miranda was in the studio, everything had to be exactly how she felt it. If she didn't feel it, no one left until she did. That artistic fire fueled her rise, but it also made her unpredictable. Crew members often found themselves walking on eggshells, trying to gauge which version of Miranda they'd get that day: the passionate artist or the irritable perfectionist. Her personal life only amplified that volatility. The highly publicized marriage and messy divorce with Blake Shelton became tabloid fuel, and those close to her said the tension bled into her work. During that period, she was known to lash out at staff, demand privacy mid-tour, or cancel rehearsals without notice. Some tour members described the post-divorce years as emotionally chaotic, with sudden mood swings and sharp words that left lingering scars. Even fellow artists found her challenging. Rumors swirled about backstage feuds, including one with fellow female stars over set times and spotlight placement. Miranda's insistence on creative control and her refusal to play nice in industry politics made her both respected and resented. But in truth, that fire, the same defiance that made her hard to work with, was also what made her great. She refused to be molded by the industry's expectations for women in country music. Over time, however, Lambert's edges began to soften. Marriage, new collaborations, and the wisdom of experience tempered her temper. Many who once struggled beside her later admitted that beneath the storm was a heart bruised by fame, someone who demanded the same emotional truth from others that she poured into her songs. Miranda Lambert remains a paradox, a country queen whose power and pain often clashed behind the scenes. For those who worked with her, the journey was rarely easy, but never forgettable. 3. Blake Shelton, the charmer with a dark streak. Blake Shelton's rise to country superstardom seemed effortless. With his Oklahoma drawl, easy humor, and hit songs like God Gave Me You and Austin, he became the kind of artist everyone thought they could have a beer with. As a coach on The Voice, his charm reached millions of viewers, crafting the image of a lovable jokester who never took himself too seriously. But those who worked closely with him, band members, producers, and backstage staff, often saw a different side of Blake, controlling, volatile, and at times emotionally manipulative. Early in his career, Shelton's natural charisma masked a growing ego. Studio collaborators recalled sessions that could swing between friendly banter and sudden bursts of irritation. He hated being challenged, especially when it came to production decisions or vocal direction. One Nashville producer described him as a guy who wanted everyone to think he was laid back, but the truth is, he needed to run the show. When things didn't go his way, Blake could become cold and dismissive, sometimes walking out mid-session and leaving others to clean up the mess. On tour, the tension was even more visible. Road crew members talked about the unpredictability of Blake days, nights when the jokes flowed freely and morale was high, versus nights when alcohol or exhaustion turned him into a storm of sarcasm and biting comments. If you were on his bad side, he'd make sure you knew it, one former tour staffer admitted. Rumors also spread about arguments with opening acts, and one incident where he allegedly fired a longtime sound tech after a heated backstage dispute. His romantic life only added to the drama. The public unraveling of his marriage to Miranda Lambert cast a long shadow over his work environment. Those around him claimed the split made him defensive and quick-tempered, especially when anyone mentioned his ex-wife. Even after finding stability with Gwen Stefani, whispers persisted that Shelton could still be difficult. A perfectionist hidden beneath the grin, a man who demanded loyalty but gave little empathy when stress hit. Yet, despite the turmoil, Blake Shelton's success never faltered. His sharp instincts and drive to protect his image kept him on top. Many colleagues admit that, beneath the bluster, he's a brilliant strategist, someone who knows exactly how to play the game of fame. To the public, Blake remains America's favorite cowboy. But to those who've stood behind the curtain, he's also a reminder that charm can be both a shield and a weapon. 4. Billy Ray Cyrus, the family man who couldn't keep it together. When Achy Breaky Heart exploded in the early 90s, Billy Ray Cyrus became an overnight sensation, the kind of star who transcended country music and invaded pop culture. His mullet became a national symbol, his voice filled stadiums, and his smile was on every talk show in America. But behind the fame, those who worked alongside him often tell a very different story. Of mood swings, paranoia, and constant chaos that made collaboration nearly impossible. In the early days, Billy Ray was known for his unrelenting drive. He demanded long hours from his band and crew, obsessing over every note and performance detail. While his perfectionism sometimes led to great shows, it also led to burnout. He wanted everything to feel bigger, louder, and more perfect, even when it didn't need to be, one road manager said. Studio sessions could stretch deep into the night, with Billy insisting on re-recording entire songs because of minor imperfections that only he could hear. As fame grew, so did his volatility. Those who toured with him in the mid-90s recalled a man who could be warm and generous one moment, then explode in anger the next. He'd lash out at sound engineers, accuse managers of betrayal, and occasionally cancel shows at the last minute over disputes no one fully understood. A few insiders blamed the immense pressure he felt to escape the one-hit wonder label, pressure that twisted into frustration and control issues. His home life didn't help. Billy Ray's marriage to Tish Cyrus and his complicated relationship with his daughter Miley became a media circus, and insiders claim that stress carried over to his professional world. Producers spoke of projects derailed by family drama or emotional breakdowns. He brought his home life to work, every day, a former assistant confessed. The more he tried to control everything, from his image to his children's careers, the harder he became to work with. Even in later years, as he reinvented himself with Old Town Road and other collaborations, old habits resurfaced. Younger artists admired his experience, but found him unpredictable, sometimes refusing to follow direction, sometimes ghosting meetings entirely. He'd go from charming mentor to brooding recluse without warning. Yet beneath the chaos was a man shaped by insecurity and loss. Billy Ray came from humble roots in Kentucky, and fame magnified both his ambition and his fear of failure. His toxic tendencies, many say, were born not of arrogance, but of desperation to stay relevant in an industry that moves fast and forgets faster. Billy Ray Cyrus remains a paradox: the loving father, the outlaw, the perfectionist, and the storm. Those who worked with him rarely forgot the experience, though few would choose to repeat it. 5. Faith Hill, the perfectionist behind the smile. To the world, Faith Hill was the embodiment of grace, a radiant Southern beauty whose voice could melt arenas and whose marriage to Tim McGraw seemed like the fairy tale of Nashville. With chart toppers like Breathe and This Kiss, she redefined modern country pop and became one of the most respected women in the industry. But beneath that polished exterior, insiders describe a demanding perfectionist whose pursuit of excellence often pushed those around her to the breaking point. Faith's work ethic was legendary and brutal. She expected the same tireless devotion from everyone in her orbit, from backup singers to tour managers. Former crew members recalled how rehearsals could stretch for 10, sometimes 12 hours, as she fine-tuned every harmony and lighting cue. Faith didn't accept good enough. It had to be flawless. One backup vocalist said she'd stop the entire band if one note felt off. That commitment produced unforgettable shows, but also created an atmosphere of tension that left even seasoned professionals drained. In the studio, Faith's exacting standards could turn creative sessions into psychological marathons. Producers noted that she would obsess over the smallest vocal nuances, demanding retakes long after the performance was technically perfect. Her attention to detail was admirable, but her impatience could be cutting. One producer recalled her icy stare when someone dared to question her vision. You didn't argue with Faith. You just fixed it. Even her relationship with Tim McGraw, often portrayed as ideal, added pressure behind the scenes. Some tour members quietly described power struggles, not between the two stars, but within their shared team. Coordinating egos, schedules, and expectations for two megastars proved daunting. Faith's insistence on control, especially during joint tours, led to frequent turnover in her crew. She wanted everything her way, even when it was supposed to be their show, a former stage manager admitted. Still, many defend her intensity as a byproduct of passion, not malice. Faith Hill knew the brutal reality of the industry, especially for women, and she refused to let complacency define her legacy. She built her empire not by being easy to work with, but by demanding the best from herself and everyone around her. Over time, that intensity softened. Colleagues who once dreaded her glare later spoke of her generosity, professionalism, and unshakable pride in her craft. For Faith Hill, perfection wasn't about ego. It was about respect for the music, the fans, and the stage that made her who she was. Working with Faith could leave you exhausted, but also inspired, because for her, anything less than perfection simply wasn't country enough. 6. Kenny Chesney, the control freak of the coastline. Kenny Chesney built an empire on good vibes. The barefoot island boy with a bottle of rum, a guitar, and a dream, with hits like No Shoes, No Shirt, No Problems, and When the Sun Goes Down, he became the soundtrack of endless summer and freedom. To his fans, he was the laid-back king of the beach. But to many who worked behind the scenes, Chesney's world wasn't nearly as carefree. They describe him as one of the most controlling and demanding figures in country music, a perfectionist who micromanaged every last detail of his empire. From lighting design to set lists, Kenny left nothing to chance. His crew often joked that there was no such thing as a minor detail in a Chesney tour. Every sound check had to match his exact tone, every camera angle had to flatter his brand, and every show had to run with military precision. He wanted the illusion of chill, one former tour manager said, but it took an army under constant pressure to make that illusion real. Behind the margaritas and sunsets was a man obsessed with control. His temper, though rarely explosive, came out in quiet but cutting ways. Technicians recalled him calling out mistakes over the intercom during live shows or lecturing staff privately after small technical glitches. He wasn't cruel, one longtime employee explained, but he made you feel like you disappointed a general. Studio producers described similar intensity. Sessions could drag for days as he chased a particular rhythm or vocal blend that only he seemed to hear. And then there was the tour culture, famously strict, almost corporate. Crew members weren't allowed to party near the artist compound, and breaking rules could mean losing your job. Kenny's obsession with his image, that perfect blend of wild fun and total professionalism, ruled every decision. It created spectacular shows, yes, but also burnout. Some former bandmates quietly admitted that working for Chesney was a privilege and a punishment. Still, those who stayed the longest saw a different side of him, a man haunted by pressure and fear of losing control. Coming from small-town Tennessee, Kenny had clawed his way to superstardom without the traditional Nashville machine behind him. That independence, once his strength, hardened into mistrust. "He built a kingdom," said one crew member, "and he's terrified of watching it crumble." To fans, Kenny Chesney remains the eternal optimist of country music, the smiling sailor with a tan and a song. But to those backstage, he's a reminder that even paradise needs order, and that sometimes the price of perfection is peace. 7. Garth Brooks, the genius who took control too far. Garth Brooks isn't just a country star. He's an institution. With over 150 million records sold, he redefined what country music could be, turning stadiums into temples of sound and spectacle. His energy was unmatched, his charisma magnetic, and his connection to fans legendary. But to those who worked behind the curtain, Garth's brilliance often came with a shadow, an obsessive need for control that left little room for collaboration or dissent. From the very beginning, Garth wasn't content to simply perform. He wanted to direct the experience. Every detail of his live shows, from lighting to pyrotechnics, had to flow according to his precise vision. One former lighting designer said he could tell if one spotlight was off by an inch. And if it was, you'd hear about it. Crew members admired his work ethic, but dreaded his intensity. Rehearsals were grueling marathons, with Garth tweaking, testing, and reworking every transition until it met his personal standard, a standard few could ever match. In the studio, he was just as relentless. Producers recall him obsessing over mixing boards, redoing takes late into the night, and sometimes rewriting entire arrangements after the band had already packed up. One engineer quipped, Garth didn't want producers. He wanted witnesses to his process. His attention to detail bordered on mania, driven by an almost pathological desire to outdo himself and everyone else. Even at the height of his fame, Garth struggled to delegate. Managers, sound techs, and even close friends learned that questioning him could end careers. "He didn't scream," said one longtime associate. "He'd just stare you down until you realized the conversation was over." It wasn't ego in the Hollywood sense. It was a deep conviction that no one understood his art as well as he did. But that conviction left wreckage. Talented collaborators burned out, teams replaced mid-tour, and a revolving door of creative partners who simply couldn't keep up. The strain extended into his personal life, too. His first marriage collapsed under the weight of fame and exhaustion. When he retired in 2001 to focus on family, many insiders thought he'd finally learned to slow down. But when he returned a decade later, the same intensity came roaring back. He wanted every aspect of his comeback to be monumental. And it was, though not without its friction. To his fans, Garth Brooks remains the ultimate showman, the man who gave his soul to the stage. To his colleagues, he's both a visionary and a cautionary tale. Proof that greatness often demands control, and that control, taken too far, can consume even the most gifted of legends. 8. Reba McEntire, the queen who ruled with an iron smile. Reba McEntire has long been hailed as the queen of country, a woman who built her empire on talent, discipline, and sheer determination. With a career spanning more than 4 decades, she became one of Nashville's most respected and decorated performers, blending warmth, humor, and power both on and off the stage. But behind the sequined gowns and charming Southern drawl, Reba was also known for being one of the toughest bosses in the business, a perfectionist who ruled her world with precision and sometimes with fear. Those who worked on her tours describe an operation that ran more like a Fortune 500 company than a music act. Every show, every cue, every outfit change was planned down to the second. Reba didn't tolerate mistakes. Not from her dancers, not from her sound engineers, and certainly not from her management. One longtime crew member said, working for Reba was like serving in the military, except she smiled while she gave orders. She expected excellence because she gave nothing less herself, rehearsing for hours until every note, gesture, and hair flip felt perfectly timed. Her insistence on professionalism could border on intimidation. Younger performers who toured with her often described feeling overwhelmed by her presence, that unmistakable mix of kindness and command. You never wanted to disappoint her, one backup singer recalled. Not because she'd yell, but because her silence could cut deeper than words. In the studio, Reba's focus was legendary. She'd spend hours perfecting a single vocal phrase, refusing to move on until it matched the emotion she envisioned. Producers who didn't meet her energy quickly found themselves replaced. Her band joked, half seriously, that Reba didn't need a producer. She was the producer. Tragedy also shaped her leadership style. The 1991 plane crash that killed most of her touring band left an indelible scar. Afterward, Reba became even more controlling, determined that no detail would ever be left to chance again. Those close to her say that experience turned her from a demanding artist into an uncompromising one, someone who valued discipline as a means of survival. And yet, despite the stories of her rigidity, few ever called her cruel. Beneath the iron rules was a heart that genuinely cared for her team, but one that showed love through standards, not softness. When the workday ended, Reba could be warm, funny, and maternal. But once the lights came on, she expected nothing short of perfection. For those lucky enough to work with her, Reba McEntire wasn't just a boss. She was a masterclass in country professionalism. But no one ever forgot. In Reba's world, the smile was real, and so was the power behind it. 9. LeAnn Rimes, the prodigy who grew up too fast. When LeAnn Rimes burst onto the scene at just 13 years old with her haunting rendition of Blue, she was hailed as country music's next big thing. A child prodigy with the soul of Patsy Cline and the drive of a seasoned veteran. She won Grammys before she was old enough to drive, and Nashville couldn't stop talking about her voice. But as fame consumed her teenage years, that early promise hardened into control issues, paranoia, and emotional volatility that would follow her for decades. From the start, LeAnn's world was chaos wrapped in stardom. Her father, who also managed her, ran her career like a business empire, leaving little room for childhood or rebellion. Crew members who worked with her during those early tours described an atmosphere of tension and exhaustion. A teenager carrying an adult's schedule, fighting for approval she could never quite earn. She was brilliant, one tour musician said, but she'd snap at people twice her age. She didn't know how to be a kid or a boss. She was stuck in between. By her 20s, LeAnn had developed a reputation as one of Nashville's most unpredictable stars. Studio collaborators recalled her fiery temper, sudden mood swings, and habit of rewriting or rejecting producers' input mid-session. You never knew which LeAnn you'd get that day, a sound engineer admitted. The genius, the perfectionist, or the storm. She demanded control over every decision, from mixing to marketing, often firing team members who questioned her instincts. What began as teenage defiance evolved into a deep mistrust of the industry she felt had used her up. Her personal scandals didn't help. The tabloid-fueled affair with actor Eddie Cibrian during the filming of Northern Lights turned her into a lightning rod for controversy. Crew members from that period say the public backlash made her even more guarded and more difficult. She would cancel press events at the last minute, lash out over minor inconveniences, or refuse to perform if conditions weren't exactly as she wanted. One former manager said bluntly, LeAnn wanted control because she'd spent her life being controlled. In recent years, she's spoken openly about her struggles with anxiety, therapy, and rediscovering balance. Many former colleagues who once called her toxic now see her differently, as a woman shaped by fame too young, too fast, and too fiercely. Beneath the anger was always the same raw brilliance that stunned the world at 13. LeAnn Rimes' story is a cautionary tale of how early fame can distort even the purest talent. For those who worked with her, it wasn't a stormy ride, but no one ever doubted the lightning that came with it. 10. Hank Williams Jr., the rebel who never knew restraint. Hank Williams Jr. grew up under the heaviest shadow in country music, that of his legendary father, Hank Sr. From the moment he stepped on stage, expectations weighed on him like chains. But instead of bowing to the legacy, Hank Jr. broke it apart and rebuilt it in his own image. Louder, wilder, and unapologetically defiant. With hits like Family Tradition and A Country Boy Can Survive, he carved out an identity as Nashville's ultimate outlaw. Yet behind the outlaw charm was a man whose volatility made him one of the most unpredictable and at times impossible artists to work with. Bandmates who toured with Hank Jr. often described the experience as a war zone in boots. His love of whiskey wasn't just an image, it was a way of life. Rehearsals could dissolve into shouting matches, and live shows frequently teetered on the edge of chaos. You never knew if he'd hug you or fire you, one former guitarist said, sometimes both in the same night. Crew members learned to keep their distance once the bottles came out, because when Hank drank, tempers flared, and no one, from the drummer to the tour manager, was safe from his wrath. In the studio, the same fire that made him brilliant could also make him unbearable. Producers recall sessions derailed by long rants about politics, fame, or the music industry's hypocrisy. He didn't want guidance, he wanted agreement, one engineer confessed. If anyone pushed back, Hank would walk out, leaving thousands of dollars of studio time wasted. Yet when he was focused, he was unstoppable, recording entire albums in a single night, fueled by instinct and raw emotion that no one dared interrupt. His temper wasn't just directed at colleagues. Over the years, he clashed with record labels, journalists, and award shows, often with explosive results. He once stormed off stage mid-performance after a technical glitch, and in another infamous incident, nearly came to blows with a fellow artist backstage over a political comment. Those who tried to manage him called it herding dynamite. But beneath the fire was pain. The mountain fall in 1975 that nearly killed him, shattering his face and skull, left deep scars, both physical and emotional. Many close to him believe that trauma magnified his mistrust and anger, feeding the persona that became both his armor and his curse. To his fans, Hank Williams Jr. is the last true outlaw, a man who never bent the knee to Nashville's rules. To those who worked with him, he was a force of nature, brilliant, infuriating, loyal one day, and impossible the next. He didn't just live his family tradition, he embodied it in all its glory and self-destruction. 11. Tammy Wynette, the tragic queen of turmoil. Tammy Wynette's voice could break hearts with a single line. Known as the First Lady of Country Music, she gave the world timeless classics like Stand By Your Man and Divorce, songs that defined an era and turned her into an icon of strength and vulnerability. But behind the honeyed drawl and the polished hair was a woman haunted by insecurity, illness, and emotional chaos, a mix that made working with her both inspiring and agonizing. Those who joined Tammy's team during her peak years describe a whirlwind of brilliance and fragility. She could light up a room with warmth and southern charm, then dissolve into tears or rage without warning. One tour pianist recalled, "You never knew which Tammy would walk in, the angel who hugged everyone or the ghost who wouldn't speak at all." Her battle with chronic pain and addiction to prescription drugs only deepened that volatility. By the late 70s, she was taking dozens of pills a day just to function, creating a cycle of dependency that left her exhausted, paranoid, and increasingly erratic. Her marriage to fellow country legend George Jones only intensified the turmoil. Their love story, both romantic and destructive, spilled into every corner of her career. When the two performed together, the chemistry was electric. But off stage, arguments, alcohol, and heartbreak poisoned the atmosphere. Band members often found themselves caught in the crossfire of their fights, unsure whether a concert would end with applause or tears. Even after their divorce, Tammy's emotional wounds lingered, shaping her relationships with musicians and producers alike. In the studio, her perfectionism rivaled her pain. She demanded absolute emotional truth from her collaborators, often breaking down mid-take if she felt the music didn't match the story she was trying to tell. Producers said she could be impossible, re-recording songs over and over, then changing her mind hours later. One engineer remembered her pacing the floor, muttering prayers between takes, terrified that she was losing the magic. Her later years were marked by illness and mistrust. Tammy's entourage became small and tightly controlled. She rarely allowed outsiders in. Those who did work with her during that time described an artist trapped between superstardom and suffering, kind but unpredictable, devoted yet impossible to please. She carried her pain like a crown, one backup singer said softly. You wanted to help her, but she didn't know how to be helped. When Tammy Wynette passed away in 1998, the industry mourned the loss of a legend. But those who had seen her up close mourned something deeper. A woman who gave everything to her art, even when it consumed her. Her legacy remains untouchable, but her story stands as a heartbreaking reminder that behind the world's most beautiful voices often lie the loudest battles.